Participate, engage, speak out, use your voice to be an effective advocate. The Voices in Advocacy podcast examines the diverse landscape of advocacy, exploring the ins and outs of building influence, driving change, and creating champion advocates. It's now time for the Voices in Advocacy podcast with your host, Roger Rickard.
Hello and welcome to the Voices in Advocacy podcast. I'm Roger Rickard, president and founder of Voices in Advocacy, where we work with organizations to inspire, educate, engage, and activate your supporters by turning them into effective, influential advocates. And this is the podcast dedicated to the art of advocacy. This podcast is for the people that work and engage in advocacy efforts for their organizations, be they corporations, associations, trade organizations, and nonprofit cause groups. If you're one of the people that work to build grassroots advocacy and grow your community of advocates, well then you are in the right place. Now, let's get started. In today's episode, we meet Austin Boyle. Austin is Manager Grassroots Engagement at the National Apartment Association, where he advocates on behalf of the rental housing industry. He has led numerous grassroots advocacy campaigns that have led to an increased, now listen to this, have led to an increased participation of up to 3,100%. Let me repeat that, 3,100%. The man must know what he's talking about. Austin, thank you and welcome to today's show.
I appreciate you having me, Roger. Excited to be here.
Oh, great. Well, I am too. I this is my passion. I love advocacy. I love talking about it. So as we get started, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of advocacy?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is, citizen advocates getting involved. My passion is obviously grassroots advocacy. The ability of, the ordinary person within any industry or within any company to really make an impact is immense. You can really make a lot of change. So when I think of advocacy, just in general, that's what I think of. I think of an ordinary person who may not work in politics, but they're able to, get up and make a real difference by informing their legislators about issues that matter to them.
By stepping forward, using their voice, by being engaged, correct?
Correct. Absolutely.
Wonderful. So coming up in your professional career, you worked for a few other different organizations. How has that developed your understanding of how to effectively build a community of advocates for the National Apartment Association?
Yeah, so I mean, over my years of experience here, I've gotten to truly, as a consultant and as an in-house practitioner, I've kind of gotten to see the full gamut of a grassroots program, effective ones that were not so effective. It's really given me the knowledge that I need in order to properly cultivate advocates, because that's really the big thing now is, developing that culture of advocacy, and not just on lobby day, but all the time. Advocacy is not just a one-day activity. It's something that needs to take part, 365 days a year. And that's how you really make change.
So how do you find those additional advocates, and whether are you looking for experienced advocates, or are you looking for anybody that has the story to step forward and speak your language?
The latter, absolutely. It can be anybody. Obviously, every organization is going to have their more seasoned advocates, folks that have been in the trenches, know what it takes, are well versed on policy issues. But we need more people. Everybody needs more advocates. Numbers are great, obviously, if you have a lot already, but cultivating the people that just truly want to be involved. That's, who I love working with, is an individual who may not know a lot or may not have a ton of experience actually trying to make change in the policy arena, but is willing to throw all in, put a lot of effort into it and try to learn on the fly.
So how does the casual member of your organization get inspired? What do you do to get them inspired to be an advocate?
Well, like I said, I think it really starts with the culture. I think that you need to, not only show them that their peers are taking part, but just make them understand of the real impact that it can have. Because there's a lot of misconceptions out there that grassroots advocacy specifically is about checking a box. And what I love about the NAA is, that's not what we do. That's not what we plan to do. It truly is an advocacy program where, we work with the folks on the ground to really impact policy at the state level, the local level, and the federal level. Go ahead.
No, I mean, first of all, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that's, if an organization says that one of their strategic pillars is advocacy, then, it's disturbing when it is nothing but a checkbox
Correct. I'm with you.
they have. So with that, then, what training do you provide for new advocates?
Yeah, so I mean, we have partnered with CMF. Give them a little plug here, but they
for those that don't know, that's the Congressional Management Foundation.
Yeah, so we work with them over there to provide a lot of content. So they do a lot of trainings with our folks. How to go about holding a virtual meeting with a member of Congress. The best way to approach staff members during those meetings, and we cultivate a lot of our own content in-house as well. So a lot of just informational one-pagers, making sure that they can kind of fully grasp, more so of a 30,000-foot view of the issues, especially for newer folks that may not necessarily understand, legislation as well as others. But we want to make sure that they are, fully loaded with all the information that they need. That way, if they do ever want to take that step into advocacy, whether it be at the local level or the federal level, they know what they're talking about, and they can always come to us with, understanding which tactics they should utilize. Sure.
So is political influence important, or is advocacy influence more important?
That's a good question. I think, I think advocacy influence is more important. I truly believe that, when it comes to those individuals that, pick up every day and, they're working their full-time jobs, and then they're also engaging in industry advocacy outside of that. I think that is really what makes change. Political influence is obviously hugely important. Just being able to make sure that, you're supporting the right candidates through a PAC or what have you, but the people on the ground that meet with their legislators, that take the time out of their day to share their stories, especially during something like COVID, it really shines a lot of light on what a particular industry can be going through.
So do you think that elected officials really want to hear from boots on the ground, if you will, people within their district?
I think they want to hear from those people more so than they do lobbyists. I think that's my biggest passion point right there, is that, members of Congress, care about their constituents more so than anything. Obviously, those are the people they represent, but also those people are the ones that vote for them. So, a hired lobbyist will not be able to cast a vote for a particular representative, but you bet that if 5 or 6, advocates that know their policy go and approach a member of Congress and discuss it with them, they're going to listen.
And that lobbyist isn't in the district, and isn't there while there's maybe a dinner going on, somebody stopping somebody else in the grocery store, all those things that happen within the community, that when something goes wrong, how quickly it can spread, and when something goes right, what goodwill can happen with that.
Exactly.
What do you think better influence looks like?
Meaning what? What do you mean, Roger?
Well, better advocacy influence. I mean, you've touched upon the fact that you believe that elected officials want to hear from their constituents.
Right.
You believe that they want to engage with them. So is there a better way to engage with them than you think some of the tactics have been used in the past?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're in a new age of advocacy where, like I said earlier, it's not about checking a box anymore. There's a lot of ways that you can now engage with a member of Congress besides just meeting with them. Social media, obviously emails, phone calls have been tried and true for years. But we've kind of started to adopt outside of the quote unquote norm for advocacy tactics, where, LTE training, letter to the editor training, where people can start writing about, their stories, getting them to local periodicals and newspapers, and making sure that people understand what it is the industry is going through. Especially in our industry, there's been a lot of, misconceptions. A lot of people, see the apartment association as representing only big corporations, and we wanted to make sure that, everyone understands we represent big corporates all the way down to small landlords. And they have stories, especially now. Everyone's going through hardships,
Yeah.
so it's very important to adopt outside methods as well.
Okay, so speaking of adapting to that, what are you dealing with? What are some of the priorities that the National Apartment Association has? Let's take the first step in dealing with the 177th Congress and the new administration.
Yeah, so our biggest priorities, the top three for us, would have to be ending the federal eviction moratorium, which was extended here through the end of March, as well as providing more rental assistance. $25 billion was supplied in the last COVID package. That's not enough. We're very appreciative of the $25 billion, but the amount of rent in arrears right now is sky high. So anything to help unburden both sides, both property owners and renters, as well as Section 8 reform, making sure that we're talking about the issue of housing affordability, especially as we move into the future, because it's a big problem.
Yeah, and particularly in the current economic situation that we find, millions of people that are out of jobs right now. That adds to that. Do those priorities? I know some of them because we're talking about federal
Right.
COVID relief packages with some of what you mentioned there. But are those priorities really different at the state level? And do you deal with the state level issues?
Yeah, so we do deal with the state level issues. We are a federated structure, so we have affiliates in every state, or mostly every state, and there's a lot of different jurisdictions within each. So we do deal with state issues, and we help them with different policy issues when they need it, and provide resources to them when they need it. It is different on the state level, just because different states have rolled out their moratoriums in different levels. DC has a complete eviction moratorium, for example, while other states are a little bit more, basically right as the CDC has written it as of now. But they're also looking, to change it now that Biden's in office. So it's always in flux. So it's a constant, informational upkeep.
So would it be fair to say that you have more hurdles in some states than you do in others?
I think that's safe to say. I think that at the state level, states, one at the top of my head, California obviously has very strict moratorium laws, especially now with different rental assistance policies that they're putting out there. But all of the states are dealing with the same stuff in terms of the federal level, which any way you shake it is really hurting everybody. So it can be slightly worse in different states, yes, but all in all, this is a national problem that we're facing.
Yeah. So with that, needing to have grassroots advocates throughout the state levels as well as at the federal level, how do you solicit? And I've been on the website and I've looked at this, so I know you do. But how do you solicit the input from your membership regarding these priorities?
Yeah, a big thing of ours, first off, is making sure that people are seeing our messaging, right? And that's through either action alerts, and website material, different content that we post on the website from our policy team, from us, the advocacy team, making sure that they truly understand what's at stake, because a lot of folks have obviously been dealing with the repercussions of the moratorium, lack of rental assistance, but there's a possibility that if we don't do anything about it now, it could get worse or extended further. The Biden administration did say something about September 30th being their aim for the eviction moratorium, so that's something we're working on to obviously try to make sure that doesn't happen. But also, we have plenty of resources on that website. Our key contact survey is a big one. We like to make sure that whoever has a relationship with an existing legislator who's in office now, we want to know about it. Because like I said, legislators listen to folks they know, especially if it's a constituent. So if someone does have a relationship, we make sure that we promote that one, very well on the website.
Well, yeah, it's who knows who knows who.
Absolutely.
And so do you think that there's a big difference between, let's say, relationship development with elected officials than it is with dealing with staff?
I honestly think, so congressional staff are the ones who do a lot of the heavy lifting. And I think that's a big misconception for, a lot of advocates, especially those that are just getting involved, especially on a lobby day or something. I've had it in the past where someone's been like, well, I'm only meeting with the legislative director, not the member of Congress. I'm like, well, the legislative director, dictates the policy for that office in a lot of ways. So the staff is, they're just as important as meeting with the member. The member makes the votes, but those staff members, they ultimately, run that office. So, that relationship cultivation, I think, is just as important, if not a little bit more important.
Those 25-year-olds that run the country.
Correct. Yes.
But they're incredibly smart. They're incredibly smart, and you never, ever want to diss them. Because you will find yourself on the outside looking in and wondering how did that happen. So I know Hey, I know you have the NAA, the National Apartment Association, has an advocacy day, and I think it's coming up in March. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so our Advocate Conference is going to be on March 8th. So it's a day full of obviously virtual sessions. We had to move it to virtual for obvious reasons. But yeah, we have our keynote speaker is Chris Wallace. So they'll be coming and take Q&A from our folks. We have informational sessions on policy, on grassroots, how to get more involved, how to advocate properly, and everything under the sun you can think of in terms of advocacy is going to be discussed. So
I have seen with a number of my clients that they've actually had an increase in participation because of it being virtual. Right. And I know that there are, inherent challenges of trying to do a Hill Day or a fly-in when you're operating under the pandemic and the current rules and restrictions that are on Capitol Hill. Are you seeing that uptick as well?
So we just opened registration maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, roughly. But yeah, right now as it stands, registration is pretty on point where it has been for in-person meetings. The way I looked at it was, because no one really had a previous marker to look at in terms of attendance, so this was all just kind of a shot in the dark for everybody. But, we saw it as it could potentially be something that people are able to blow off a little bit more easy, just because it's virtual. And if there's something else pops up, but at the same time, it's ease of access. You don't have to fly to DC. You don't have to worry about hotels. It's something that's right here. And a big thing was also if people were nervous to go sit in an office with a legislator, that's a big thing, so virtual meetings makes it a little bit more palatable for those folks, to make sure that their voices are heard.
Now, do you schedule those meetings for those groups or do you kind of create team leaders that schedule those, or do you have an outside scheduler?
So our affiliates, make sure the scheduled meetings are put up and everything like that. We provide them the process to make sure that all the meetings are kept track of, appropriate feedback is given, because that's obviously the most important part. But we make sure that, we work with the affiliates to make sure they have everything they need to schedule the meetings. But yeah, it's a seemingly smooth process.
At the end of the year, when you're evaluated, are you evaluated on how much grass you grow? In other words, how big do you grow the community of advocates, or is it a matrix of a number of things?
Yeah, it's a mix of multiple things. When I came on here at the NAA, it's they made it known that they were looking to move the policy needle. That was the number one thing that attracted me, to the position, was that's what they wanted. Obviously number of actions taken, number of folks participating is obviously huge. But at the same time, if we're making a true impact on different policy issues to support, the federal lobbying efforts, that's just as important, if not more so. So it's a mix of things.
Wonderful. Well, good. Okay, so did you always want to be involved in advocacy, or was there another path? Because I know that you had worked for some campaigns. I know that you had worked in some elected officials' offices in different places.
Right.
So what drove you to where you're at today?
Yeah, I mean, it was not always advocacy for me. It was the wide world of politics was what had intrigued me at first. And I think I needed to kind of weed out different options to kind of see what made sense for me, what didn't. So I started out in campaigns. Campaigns were great, but it definitely burns you out.
So what age did you start?
So I worked on my first campaign at 17 years old. So I knew that I wanted to work in politics for quite a long time, but but campaigns burned me out. And advocacy always just kind of seemed like something, because to me, campaigns, they ended after a while, right? I mean, and that's kind of how I looked at it was, all right, after November.
Now where?
I got to go find another candidate and start over again. But with advocacy, it was different policy areas that it was an ongoing fight, and that was what intrigued me. Was this wasn't something that ended after November. It was something that we constantly had to adapt and evolve and make sure that, we had the answers to implement proper solutions. So
I love asking the question about when you got involved and why. I had a neighbor that was very active, that was older than me, but I'm a big guy. I'm 6'8", and so when I was young, I was big. And at 13, I started working on political campaigns.
Wow.
And that's
good for you.
that's a lot of shoe leather express back in the day, working and walking door to door and talking to people and getting a real handle on what was going on. Well, Austin, this has been wonderful. Any final thoughts you'd like to share? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is obviously the advocacy podcast. I mean, this is kind of the spot to talk about advocacy. And I think that, anybody listening that, is thinking of ways to get their members engaged, within advocacy, it's really just about finding those pinpoint issues that can really motivate folks. And I think that during this time, obviously COVID has been horrible across the board, but in terms of advocacy, this is a time where people are dealing with real world issues and they need solutions. And this is a time where, we can find folks to really champion these issues, because it's a necessity for every industry, not just apartments, not just rental housing, but any and all industries. So I think that if done in the proper way, anybody can really cultivate a culture of advocacy within their organization.
I love that. If done the proper way, anybody can cultivate an atmosphere of advocacy. That's fabulous. Austin, how can people reach you for more information, particularly if they're listening to this podcast and they're in your industry, and how can they participate?
Yeah, so my email is aoboyle@naahq.org. But yeah, I mean, if anybody has any questions, advocacy related, or if they're within the rental housing community, feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I'm always happy to help answer them. And
we'll add those into the show notes. So if anybody didn't quite catch everything, it'll be in the show notes that you can pick up. Well, that's a wrap up today's great conversation with Austin Boyle, the National Apartment Association. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Roger. I appreciate you having me.
And now it's time for the advocacy engagement tip. Today's tip is one of 5 reasons your supporters do not participate in your grassroots advocacy efforts. And we kind of touched upon that a little bit earlier. This one of the 5 is fear. People fear that they will not know as much as about the issues as the elected official or their staff will know. But you, the advocate, are the expert. You know more about that field than they do. But they do fear, people fear that they will not know how to answer questions and that they could be embarrassed. They fear that elected officials and their staff don't want them to meet with them and hear their concerns. You heard Austin earlier say that's not the case. They want to know from their constituents. And we in the advocacy arena know that this is simply not true. Elected officials definitely want your input and your engagement. And in fact, it's really the polar opposite. They need it for their own survival in politics. So does your organization provide training and best and practice time for your supporters? Hey, just a couple of quick notes here at the end of the episode. I'd love to hear from you and contribute your thoughts, because I'm sure you're probably wiser than I am. And in any upcoming episodes, we will be treating you to great interviews from leaders in the world of politics, associations, nonprofit causes. I'm sure you will enjoy these interviews. If you like today's podcast, head over to where you find your podcast, be that Apple, Google, Spotify, or you can even go ask Alexa to play the Voices in Advocacy podcast. A big thank you today to Austin for being on the show. I greatly appreciate your time and your passion for helping others through advocacy. And we at Voices in Advocacy work with organizations to inspire, educate, engage, and activate your supporters by turning them into influential advocates. Well, that's it for this episode of Voices in Advocacy. Remember, you have the power to be effective and influential. Now go out and make it a better world.
We hope you enjoyed today's Voices in Advocacy podcast and look forward to you joining us again next week. To learn more about Voices in Advocacy, go to our website, voicesinadvocacy.com.